whole high school, if I'm white, do I get the same consequences? If I'm Latino, do I get the same consequences? If I'm African American, do I get the same consequences? We got to get a handle on that happening, meaning equitable consequences in our district. And that is something I've been charged with, and that is a major part of my job, to the point that on a weekly basis, I will have a subpart of one of the teams I'm getting ready to tell you about. And if you've watched the board meetings or the work sessions, you'll know these teams because I've already mentioned them. One of our jobs weekly will be to generate all kinds of reports to look at equity, again, internally across schools and then across the district for different infractions. And then we'll be looking at restraints and seclusions every other week. And then we'll also be looking not just at restraints and seclusions for aggressive behaviors, but we have special schools that have students that might self-abuse. They deserve the same kind of monitoring for appropriate practices as our students that might be acting out in other schools. We tend to kind of focus on our students that are maybe being restrained as a result of a fight or an altercation, handled appropriately. Yes, they need to be. But also, we need to worry too about our folks that don't have a voice, that are in some of our, maybe an autistic student or a severely disabled student who might be restrained for reasons that are appropriate. Is that happening appropriately? I'll be monitoring with the team all of those things. And when we have issues, working through our assistant superintendents that supervise the leadership in those schools, and making sure we have training and other resources provided to schools that might need other supports. And then finally, on a monthly basis, I'll be reporting to the board on whatever they ask Jonathan to ask me for. So they have not told me yet what they want, and I think it'll probably just be organic, meaning whatever the community's asking for, it's probably going to be what they want. And we'll deliver that because we'll be working on that every week. That'll be part of something that I do. So that kind of gives you an idea of what some of the most urgent pieces of my job are where the handbook is concerned. Two other things I want to mention about the handbook. One, we've added a little bit to progressive discipline language, but we were trying to help parents and people understand what that means and how we want to try to train our administrators to use that, teachers to use that to support students. And progressive discipline is just that. And so we have confusion over, does it mean that I have to go through all the levels before if it's a really aggressive behavior? No. Does it mean that I don't have to do that if it's a lesser behavior? No. I mean, progressive discipline is what's appropriate. And administrators have a range of consequences or things they can consider. And the design is, for more minor infractions, they're at the lower end of that spectrum. I'll be monitoring all those things during my audits on a weekly basis. So this is a whole new, no one's ever really done that as part of their job. I mean, this is a very, very new thing, and it is going to probably create some really good conversations. It's also going to give some people the blues, and that's just part of it. You know, we've got to get a better handle on being able to talk about what are the issues. I would rather just go and say, we've got a real problem with whatever, and let's fix it. But let's not act like we don't see it, and I'm not saying people have acted like that. I'm just saying it really hasn't been part of anybody's job to police it in the way that I have been charged with doing, for lack of better terms, and I left anything out. Okay, so in regard to the handbook, a couple of things I want to draw your attention. It is online. It's on the app and it's online. It just went up. I think I approved the last version of edits. At the end of last week, we did have some amendments that set us back a little bit by the board on Tuesday. If you watched the meeting, they added a handful of things that we had to go back, and then of course editors have to make sure it all looks right, and then we have to change everything and repaginate the table of contents. I mean, all these things that no one thinks about, but it's up there. It's up there for you. What we're going to do to be communicating with our parents and families, we're doing a few things that I like and I think are pretty progressive. One, while we're waiting on it being printed, we have to print like 100,000 of these things. So we're waiting on lots of these things to come to us. So I'm saying it's probably going to be 4 to 5 weeks before the paper ones are in hand. So prior to that time, you're going to be sending postcards to families with the link to the code that's online so that they can be seeing that immediately for their families and for their students. And we're going to be making sure that they know that. In addition, when the paper copies come home, we're going to be asking all schools to publish that date for us as a district. So when are you sending home the codes of conduct? We're going to be communicating those to as many people as we can, faith-based organizations, people that we have access to, and we're going to be doing the IC email system. So every school has all the families, and Infinite Campus, they're going to do an IC Blitz saying, hey, their handbook for student support's coming home today. Please make sure you look through that. And again, anything that we can, because we know our little ones probably take it home in a folder. Our older students, we know, get it in hand. And mom, grandma, anybody may not know to expect it to come home. They're not doing anything wrong. They just have no clue the book, it's in the locker, it's on the bus. Or sometimes they might actually bring it home, which is great. I know that if my girls didn't have to put things in their folder, I probably wouldn't see anything. So we want to make sure families have a good heads up. And then our staff members, our certified staff members, are getting the progressive discipline plan, all of the defined behaviors, and all of the leveling that's in what has famously become the dot pages. But the places that tell you what are the behaviors that are infractions and what are the different levels of consequences that can be assigned to those, so that they know starting right off the bat, because there are many, many changes. In addition, we'll be training administrators differently than ever. Small group, we're going to be differentiating that training according to the type of school. If it's a highly disproportionate school, they're getting a different training that is more detailed with more information. The other thing we've done is alter the number of choices that people have to put in for consequences. We had some very kind of cloudy and broad consequences that administrators can add that could put on there that was really hard. Like, what does that mean? Constructive assignment. Okay, well, what was the assignment? What, no one in this room wants to sit around and figure that out, right? So I took it out. What does that mean? What would be the only constructive assignment I could give a student for misbehavior? Well, there really is only one that's legal and appropriate. That would be reflection about your behavior. We put a behavior contract in place, or we did a plan. That's now in place of constructive assignment. So I have done some very aggressive changes to make sure that while I'm taking data and monitoring what we're doing, that we're not assigning consequences that are hard to tell what they mean. Community members shouldn't have to wonder what that means. And so we want to make sure that we're a little bit more clear. Another example of that too, we have lots of referrals. We have more mental health counselors in buildings. We've added some things like that so that we know, well, did you do peer mediation? Were you referred to a mental health counselor? Those are now options for administrators to add. To your point on bus disturbances, that has been a major debacle because the only thing administrators could enter at this point was bus disturbance. So going through that data and trying to read the narrative and figure out what in the heck happened with any kind of trend is really fruitless. So what we are doing now is we're changing the way that we enter that data. Now it is, what was the behavior, the location is bus. So did I write on the back of the seat, vandalism, location, bus? Did I use profanity, profanity, vulgarity, location, bus? Now we can disaggregate the bus data, all the ways that we can disaggregate what happens inside of a school to try to get a handle on, are buses coming from Cameron Middle School giving equitable consequences from administrators as the buses that are coming from whatever other middle school, JCPS. So you can see that all these things, we're really trying to shore in how we gather our data so that it's not fuzzy, so that people don't have to guess, because I'm personally not interested in being responsible for that. I have to be responsible, so it has to make sense, and I have to be able to speak about it, and so I'm excited about that change. Let's see. I think that's the...
Let's take a break.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just a few things, and
Yep.
then if anybody else has questions,
Yep.
something that you want to ask with everything that she's already given, things that she's changed, and we definitely, we got the notes of, what was changed previous. Is there a way to see what was changed, like per the handbook? Because I know you write in more information than, what was on the outline.
Okay, I want to make sure that so you're talking about the outline that I presented on Tuesday to get it approved?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. The only changes since that time have been the amendments, and I have those electronically. I'll be happy to send those to you.
Okay.
Yes.
So one of the,
Can I follow up on that? Is there a way online for parents, and 90% of the parents are returning parents, for them to see what the change is in the 50-page document, so they won't have to read the whole document to see what's changed?
There is not like a redlined, what would help me is what do you think they would want to see? There's been so much, for instance, like all the success pathway language came out. Do you think I could do kind of like like a quick reference page and add it to the app
Well, no, I
with
think,
changes?
I think like right now, while you're under investigation, that would create transparency for you all, because yes, I'm wondering what all was changed.
In the handbook?
From
Okay.
before, because there's a lot of, what you added, it is making me a little bit upset that it wasn't there already, and I understand that, we needed checks and balances, but I think like everything else in this movement, it's 2016, that should have already been done. So one of the first things I wanted to say, because everything you've done has been, it sounds like it's going to be a little bit better, but if we're gonna make sure that diversity is at play, because we gotta understand it's a lot of white educators and a lot of white administrators, with a lot of students who are marginalized, and these are the students that are getting, these discipline. How many people around in your teams are African American, speak a different language, are non-white?
I would have to think through, I mean, they're diverse. So I've got 4 teams, and I mean, employee-wise, very diverse, but I'll get all those stats to you and I'll bring them next month.
Okay,
So
so
you
that,
want- you
actually
want-
want that before you come back.
Right, so get it to you, but we'll talk about it.
Yeah, I'll send that.
And I wanna make sure I know what you mean. So you mean in my organizational chart, right, so who I supervise, and then you want also the 4 teams that I've mobilized to help with the work.
Yes.
Okay, and you're wanting, sex, race, so gender, race, and that's it?
Language,
Okay.
abilities, disabilities, etc. Those diverse. See how that's important? It's like, these are some things that we would think about, and necessarily, like, genotype people would think about. Oh, so were there any things, like, holistically that you all thought about changing as well into the code of conduct? Did that ever come up? This is just a question from community members.
Not that, I mean, other than what I've mentioned, I would say no.
And I would say, just watching Katy kind of take over the work midstream, we've had conversations about, we're getting something solid for this year with the understanding there's more to be done. So.
Yeah, but I mean, I got appointed July 1st, so
I mean, that's
being
fine.
able to change the tide of, I mean, how many months did Dr. Marshall's team work on the code prior to me showing up? I mean, we would never have gotten anything published, but, I mean, I ripped and roared through that thing. It is staggeringly different than it was even when I took it over for the work session, the June 26th, and Chris is nodding. It is significantly different, because also I had to be able to work with it. What I got initially, I couldn't work with.
And I think for the most part with our coalition is that people are seasoned and veteran education advocates. So the handbook is just like one minor piece, and like 10% of like
Agreed.
what the total problem is. So my next question goes into that training. We know that the budget is not giving any major funds to training. So have you all developed any PDs or any training towards understanding, because you did mention that you had to put in language so that the teacher or the administrator knew when they could administer the discipline.
We have a progressive language section of the code, absolutely. And actually, that's less for our administrators because, I mean, that's part of language that we use all the time with administrators. We also want to make sure that families in the community understand the progressive nature of our expectations for discipline. Yeah.
So what I'm saying, are the teachers gonna understand that? Because like when the teacher walk in happened, a lot of people were misunderstanding that when it happened.
Agreed, and I do want to let you know that JCPS sent us a complete blue ribbon. They are totally in support of the handbook that was just passed. So, and again, that's mostly because it is an entirely different document than the one that they attended at town meetings, or the one that they saw, excuse me, at town meetings last spring, because I was a principal at that time, and my teachers came back clocking out about it. They were very upset. But a lot of the items that were changed in ways that made them feel better about their safety, their options, and administrators' options as well.
Does anybody have any questions there before I go through?
Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, do you have any type of liaisons that would do work beyond the school itself? What I mean is, I worked at JCPS for 7 years, I've been in school for 2 years. And what I came to find out was a lot of the problems are existing outside of the school. And if they're not addressed, and you just address them in the school, you're I'm just wondering if you had any type of liaison structure that would take someone into the community to visit sporadically, specific parents or homes and neighborhoods, community centers like that, in an effort to use developmental concepts to affect school when they're at school.
The answer to that would be yes, but not, it needs to be more formal and systemized. So what has happened in many situations, I'm thinking of the people, the faces are coming up for every different school, but those relationships honestly have probably been built less by the district, more by the folks at the school, right? There are different people from their community that come forward and offer help, people they know from the faith-based group, people that they knew just personally, that they mobilized to come support them. I think what would be better, however, I've been attending some meetings with the coalition, we've been talking a little bit around the Say Yes to Education initiative. Those are organizations that have systemized wraparound supports in communities. So my answer to you is there is a fragmented, mostly homegrown version of that, yes, meaning we have lots of advocates that support different schools. It is not organized in a way that is easy for us to access at the district level, which is frustrating because we would like to be able to do that. It works beautifully in a business model for support of our career theme schools, for project-based learning and career technical education. We need a system that defined for support for our schools in a more social emotional way. And I honestly, as a school principal that was part of a school like that, I think I can think of ways that we can do that, but that to me is part of the system that I'm trying to build. And I agree it's necessary.
Yeah, and also, I'm not gonna be long, I came to find out that with the IEPs that most of the higher risk students have, there's a detachment as it relates to the sociological aspect, the psychological aspect, the school administration itself, and the parents. And they're half-heartedly implemented because no one is in sync, and they don't communicate with each other to affect one system as they work with each individual child. So one person saying, okay, I'll do this, the other person saying, I haven't even read the IEP, so I'll just grab the kid. You know, and there's certain triggers that are in the IEP that are necessary and should be followed. But when there's a detachment between those entities that I just mentioned, I think that it creates a fragmented strategy. And I think there should be some type of system involved where there's a collaboration where everybody understands the social and psychological structure of the IEP.
Well, I think beyond that, for students that don't even have IEPs,
I'm
there's
speaking
need
of the
for-
alternatives.
No, I get it, but I'm even thinking, like, to me, that's just a microcosm of the entire issue of trauma sensitivity.
Exactly.
And so we need to do a better job, and part of my work, actually it's really not part of my work, but I'll be partnering with Dr. Averett. She is adding positions under her umbrella. She's predominantly works with the Exceptional Child Services Program, she oversees that. And the trauma sensitive schools initiatives are formally underneath her purview. However, just training on understanding things like the ACEs study, trauma sensitivity, that is something that I think all of our schools need. It's being implemented again in pockets. There are programs like Bounce that are great and being expanded. But even before a program, do you understand the data? Do you understand the studies? Do you understand, just people need information. I mean, besides training, that needs to come, of course. But before that, we can train people and it doesn't cost anything. And so that's something that we are looking into trying to get into our schools and increase. That language again has been added to the handbook. We've actually repurposed some positions in the org chart approved last Tuesday to support Dr. Averett in working towards that. And I agree with you. And we have not done enough, and we will continue to try to do more.
And one last thing, a lot of the security staff that works in the schools, I mean, they don't, I think a lot of them need more extensive training as to working with kids on youth, in the development of youth concepts. They don't really know how to work with a kid that maybe comes from the inner city. When I worked at the alternative school system, most of the security guards there were big white guys or policemen. They had no idea to relate to a kid. I worked there 2 years at 3 incidents right to tackle a kid. I've seen people tackle kids 6, 7 times a day. I've seen broken collarbone, eardrums, broken noses. I've seen kids bruised up. I've seen big grown men bragging in the hallway. And these are just unacceptable. I even tried to initiate some change myself and was squealed on like a family line within the JCPS system where nobody talks about what goes on in the alternative school system. So I think that instead of training and breaking down that barrier where people would feel free to speak out for kids getting physically traumatized or mentally traumatized is very important as well.
I agree, and I have that noted, and that's something that I not only agree with, but I think we can make impact on. And again, it's not going to cost anything. We just need to educate people. And then I agree with you that, you know, we need to monitor, and we need to make sure that we are aware. It's nice for me. I have 7 schools, not 30-something schools like the other area soups. I will be in my buildings.
Or segregate or make the staff friendly to the ethnicity of the student body. It's like what they say, yeah, diversity. It's like with the police. You know, they say maybe we should have more African American police in the black community. Maybe in certain schools you need, you know, so far as communication, maybe that should be considered.
Thank you.
Okay.
I had some things to add to that because I actually spent the last 7 years working in residential facilities, and you brought up a point earlier about like the alternative schools. You know, it's got that mantra of like, oh, you know, this is where all the bad kids go. Well, the bad kids go there because the public schools don't accept kids who have righted their wrongs and gotten straight A's in an alternative school like Brookline or Maryhurst, and has a report that shows that they haven't had any incidents in months. They've been there for like over a year and they still can't get in. So they end up going to these alternative schools and getting really, really upset and backtracking because all of the work that they put forth to try to change their life, just like somebody who has a felony, you can't do anything. You know, there's no support there for that. And also with the IEP situation, coming from the background of working with kids who have individualized treatment plans, I cannot deviate away from a treatment plan or I lose my job. Point blank, period. An IEP is just as serious. I teach autistic kids in New Albany right now, so I'm a little bit more familiar with the IEPs and how for autistic kids, they're really rarely ever followed. Thinking about some of the incidents that have happened, you know, with kids having broken bones and stuff like that in the restraint, I've restrained probably over a couple of 100 kids. And I've had some incidents where there were injuries, but it was mainly due to a fight, a struggle of a kid that was twice my size. I mean, that's with help. And if you don't have help, you're more likely to, you know, have an issue, you know, where you're gonna probably, you know, end up losing your job or get in trouble because you weren't doing something the way that you were supposed to. So if you all are going to be using restraints, you figure out the best way to implement them and make sure that people have support. Because if you have to restrain a teenage boy who, you know, is on a football team and is twice your size, like, you know, it's for both sides, like, you know, there needs to be support. The child, you know, needs to know that, like, if I get out of line, you know, and a staff member is not going to carry their personal problems in and then have to restrain me, because that happens a lot when you're dealing with kids' emotions and you have to restrain them. So I think it's more than just the language and just kind of we need to really like kind of pay attention to the effects on the person that's doing the restraining and the child, because for a child that comes from a violent background, that is re-traumatizing every single time. And it doesn't carry well with the person that has to do the restraining either. So like when you have one person that's solely, you know, having to deal with these incidents, or a couple of people, when you have a lot of kids that could potentially need to be restrained, that's a hostile, dangerous environment. And you have some people who will back down from that, but then you have other people who feels like, you know, well, I'm just gonna have to do what I gotta do outside of my training to make sure that, you know, I don't get hurt. And that's not the objective. You're supposed to be protecting kids. And that really kind of hasn't been put in the forefront with using these restraints. And as somebody who's done these restraints for quite a while now, it's very disheartening to see, and there really needs to be a change, because, you know, when you're having to pay money to parents because of something that happened to, you know, that was lack of training right there. Just looking at that was lack of training. For somebody who used to train, you know, safe crisis management, that was lack of training. And that,
So,
yeah.
I just helped this past couple of weeks.
So this is right in your wheelhouse, like.
Revise our procedures connected to our policy on safe crisis management. And one of the things that we did, one is specify exactly which training can be used and which cannot. And so, it's a nationally recognized best practices, safe crisis management training. And then the second thing is that we, specified that each school has to have at least 5 people who are trained in safe crisis management. And for schools that deal with, that have a higher than average incidence of restraint, that there would be an analysis done to see if it needed to be a bigger team. So you would get a set of people that provide those supports that you were talking about, so that you have a team of people that be able to respond.
Well, one last thing to add to the safe crisis management, the most effective tool is using your mouth. It's talking. And just going off of some of the stuff that I've heard and going to different meetings and, with some of the parents that have come forward, and children who have come forward, that's really not what's happening. I've worked around some pretty extremely hostile children and teenagers in my day, and I have walked away. I have stopped riots at my job just by talking. And so it's possible. It is very possible, almost every time. So like that, there really needs to be, a handle on like, okay, so what did you do before you decided that, that this child was a danger, needed to be removed, or or whatever. Obviously, if 2 kids are fighting, then there is no talking. You go straight hands on. That's.
I agree.
Those are
Your
my
point
concerns.
about the transitions back from some of our hospital schools is something we can definitely. I can move on that, and that's a great point because people again tend to talk more about regular school and alternative or alternative back. I've heard fewer voices, almost none, speaking from our hospital students' frustration of trying to get back to a regular school instead of an alternative site, because we have some that do want to go to the alternative site to the extent that we can expect. Just understand many of these pieces, especially the trauma sensitivity. That's not something they're really getting right now. Understanding progressive discipline, understanding the code, understanding what that means. We are looking at new ways to engage those groups because we have not done a great job engaging them to this point. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Someone else. Okay, no. Okay, mine is on dealing with mental health.
Yes.
Many times, what I've noticed, the difference between the families and the school, that there's like this big, huge gap, and that there's been something that's been going on for half a year or a year or more, and they don't have, the families feel like they have no advocacy. Like when they step in a room, they have like 15 administrators and teachers, and they're all upset and frustrated about their child, but there's no one there that helps them on their case, and so they're frustrated because many of the times there is this course of like preconceived notions of what the family's about, or many I guess on certain things that weren't put into place. Like many of them, the kids are not really fully diagnosed with a mental health condition, but many teachers felt like that this person, they're ADHD or they're this, and they have nothing, or the parent was smart enough or wise enough to put the kid on some type of medication, but did not go through the full process of mental health, meaning they didn't see a therapist, they went ahead and asked their pediatrician, I think that he might be this way, and then all along they see the side effect of the medication, and either the medication was too strong or not as strong enough or not effective enough, or it's doing something to them and gives a bad side effect. And they said, I'm not doing this to my kid anymore, and I'm going to send him to school. And so the teacher sees the kid first kind of focus, and all of a sudden the medication's taken out of their system, and their body's not used to it. And so all this is happening, and so they don't know how to handle it or know how to deal with the kid. And I've seen it many a times when we go to meetings and provider meetings that there are certain elements that have been there, like a mental health person has worked with their kid, but the parent has no idea and had no idea the whole year that this person was working with their kid until some situation that comes crisis where JCPS is involved and other mental health professions are involved, and the parent had no. So many a times, if there is a liaison for the families, that would help a whole lot of getting an understanding, because there is this sense of frustration and no medium in between their communication, and many a times it gets to the point point where it's so frustrating on the school's part, on the educator's part, on that part, versus, and it's so frustrating with the parents' part, they can't talk to each other. And it gets really negative because here's the kid suffers in the middle. And many a times they're like, well, maybe he can go to another school,
And that's
to
what-
that point. And I've seen that. So
Yeah.
if
And
we
I'm
can
in
get
that
a
place.
liaison for the families,
Yeah, so I think
that
that's
many a
it.
times.
I want to make sure I'm hearing you, because I
Yeah.
want to say back what I think you're asking me to try to figure out.
Okay.
So what you would like, or you think would be helpful, is when parents are asked to come to the school potentially for a meeting, or they're called in over some issue, that we have some kind of parent liaisons in Jefferson County that could either work on a volunteer basis potentially, clearly be trained consistently, but basically like an on-call. So
Yeah.
I know that I've got a meeting at this time, I would then have some way to mobilize a parent to meet me there, and then be my advocate,
Yeah,
and
to be the
just
parent's
sit with me
advocate.
and help me kind of cut through the red tape. I know the systems, I know what all this stuff, because I do agree, my daughter's dyslexic. I did not get her an IEP. I mean, it's not even recognized really as a disability, but there are lots of things I could have gotten her probably added supports with. But I know that I just didn't want to deal with that. I just didn't want her to have to deal with that.
Because the negativity.
Well, and I knew there would be some decisions made, and there would be folks interacting with her, and I may not always know, or she might get pulled out for something. And again, and that even kind of happened when her teachers found out she was dyslexic without an IEP. So I mean, I get this, and I have 2 little kids, and sometimes, and I have no elementary, like I've never been in elementary, so I sit in elementary school, and I'm like, okay, what happens here? What is all this you're talking about? So I understand that, and I think that to me is like that's a real low-hanging fruit. I mean, that's something we could do. I would have to think about how.
Yeah, we have.
Good, so Jonathan, but I've got that
Can I
down.
ask for clarification, because this has come up before in Siobhan's case. This is not ombudsperson kind of stuff.
This is not?
Not ombudsman office kind of
No,
stuff.
no.
This is advocacy for the child.
Well,
Yes.
And there are structures out there that you could model it after,
I know that, I just want to make sure. that it
No,
doesn't
this
kick
would
back
not
there.
be, this is not an,
Because
you're
that's what
enemy,
people have
this
been
is,
told,
yeah,
is
no.
go to the ombudsperson.
Oh, I mean, they could do that, but
That is
that's
not an
that's
advocacy.
one person for an entire, and I agree with, that's not what that's designed for.
That's a navigator.
We're
that's
looking
not
for a person to sit with you and
per
help you
school,
navigate a meeting.
Per school, because each school's different.
Yeah.
And per school, it would be, and that's not biased, meaning not
Right,
already done
objective.
with, very open and objective, and it's for the parent.
And I'm kind of looking at a structure like that. I was thinking of differently because we have a perception that our due process at the board level. So if it gets past a local school level for a suspension or a student placement, we're looking at completely revamping that system because people come in feeling like it doesn't matter what I say or do, the district's gonna win. So why even bother? So that's another part of the system that I'm redesigning. And I was already considering a role like that, of some kind of, again, objective community partner that would, whether it be on a rotation or something. So I think that's something that's very tangible that we could do. Thank you, that's a great suggestion.
Okay. You will go ahead, I was gonna say something in between there, but.
I may have to,
but
Chanel,
I
I'm gonna
forget.
have to go in a second.
Chanel, but, yeah, then her question, so his. and then-
Yeah. I believe we was talking about the teams of safe crisis management inside the schools. How far has the district came with making all administrators safe crisis management? There are times where administrators have been involved in incidents involving students, and if a teacher was involved in an incident, had it been an administrator on the scene, it could have been prevented.
So the recommended, I'm doing this by memory, so, but I believe it's, on a 5-person team, you'd have 1 administrator, 1 teacher, 1 ECE teacher, 1 non-certified staff, so usually an instructional assistant, and then 1 other person who could be, potentially a security person or something like that. So that's the recommended thing. I think it really depends case by case, and principals would have the discretion to decide who their team was. But we have to, we actually did this just this past week, confirming that every school has a team, that every
My
member of
office
the
finished
team has
that.
been trained. that, you know, that all of that's in place and they know how the systems are gonna work. And I think that's part of what Katie's job is. There's a lot of stuff that has been happening here or there, or here, or not here and not there. And
I gotta
her
get a
role is
handle on it.
gonna systematize that to make sure it's happening everywhere and every kid is getting that fair and equitable.
And most of the time when an incident happens,
Yeah.
it's a radio call. And most of the time when there's a radio call, a supervisor is on scene. So most of the time, since that supervisor is on scene, that supervisor is going to take control of the situation. I suppose, because most of the time that happens, security's not there or available.
That's
So-
a good idea.
Well, and
If-
so to that point, I will assure you, in my vision, all security, meaning districts, people that are security, and all assistant principals and principals will be required to be trained. That's not part of Jonathan's, that's my vision. I can tell you what, if your school's data's jacked, your whole team's gonna be trained. And that's gonna be something I'm going to direct, just from my purview, to their assistant superintendent. Because if you've got sideways data, all your assistant principals, the principal, and your security staff, we're gonna bring trainers to your school. Let's get ready to rock and roll. What days do you want it? And that's gonna be something that we're gonna prescribe as, to me, a kind of a corrective strategy for, you know, schools that we think might be struggling with that issue. I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at everybody. I feel like I've left you guys out a little more than the rest of the, that's something that I agree with, and I think that my vision moving forward over time would be that those people will just have to be. And it'll make it a lot easier because then once they are, the re-upping and just us being able to centralize and provide trainers in a geographical region that makes sense, we can make it easier. Right now, it's not easy. It would be easier if everybody had to. I promise you, I mean, it would be so much easier. So that's kind of why I'm envisioning as I now have control moving forward, because I don't disagree with you. I agree with you, and that's already going to be a corrective strategy at schools that are struggling. And then, guys, I say this with love. I'm going to take one more, then I've got to go, and then anything else you guys want before next meeting, Chanel, if you'll gather that, and I would be happy to get you anything that you want other than what I've already been asked to get.
Okay.
But this is just a quick suggestion. So I've been working with a research team at U of L for the past 7 or 8 months. And for U of L's accreditation, we've been studying teachers and their perceptions of how prepared they feel to work with their schools. So we've been conducting focus groups, and most of them are from priority schools. And it seems like over and over again, like what we're hearing is half of them are acknowledging, I have bias, I have privilege, I'm racist, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to handle it. And then the other half of the focus groups just seem ignorant of their inherent biases and privilege and racism, or they don't understand the cycle of poverty. Like one even said, you know, that she penalized a elementary school student for not having supplies on the first day of school, and I mean, this was a low-income student. Like maybe they just didn't have the money, and they just don't seem to understand that. And so I don't know if that's a partnership, because they're getting this preparation from colleges, from their bachelor's or master's programs, but they're not understanding privilege. They're not understanding racism. I mean, some of them even they said that they're afraid of the parents, and that that they've never even been to the neighborhoods where their students live, and that they have no idea how to handle these kinds of situations. And so I don't know if that needs to be a partnership between public schools and colleges, so that, because a lot of what they were saying is that they're not student teaching in these kinds of schools, but then they're being placed in these schools because of high needs, and they have no idea how to, and I mean, I'm just quoting them, how to handle these kinds of students.
Well, in the student teaching piece, that is definitely have to be a partnership, because as a priority school principal, so, alternative certification was another thing that used to kind of ethically break my heart. And I'll say the reason for that is because, yes, priority schools are complicated. Our kids are not hard, they were not hard to deal with, but if you student taught in a place that was completely like void of diversity or any kind of acting out at all, and you get, again, our kids were fantastic and the school culture was positive, but we did have students with severe poverty issues, and that brings a lot of other, things with you. I am saddened by any kind of comment about supplies, because our district as a system has taken a lot initiative to control and centralize the supplies, meaning not allow schools to give supply lists that exceed this, control the different levels. I know at Wagner, as a high school, I provided a basic package of supplies to my students every trimester in every class. And I didn't want supplies to ever be, one, I didn't want teachers to talk about it. I'm like, zip, I don't ever want you to tell me students, anything's happening to a student for not having supplies. They have supplies. Their supplies, your supplies, have supplies forever. So that's very troubling, and we'll go back to work on that. But the universities tend to place their folks. And so what we really need to do, and of course I am an adjunct professor at the School of Education, I actually do principal certification folks, and their internships are almost required to all be in environments that are some of our more challenged as far as being assistant principals and principals. You're not going to go have an experience at a school that, I mean, has nothing happening with diversity or management or any of those types of things for the same reasons you're concerned, right? So what I need to do is figure out who, I know the folks, the placement folks that I worked with as the principal at my school, but there are more than one that place from different programs. So I think that's a great point. That's something I can definitely do, because I certainly know enough people in the dean's office I can figure out who that person is. But I agree with you that we're not doing anyone a favor. And they're also, those schools are saturated. New hires aren't getting hired in those schools. And then we have our alternative certification folks who are usually amazing folks, but they don't student teach. So you put a person in an environment who is not student taught or been around kids in a classroom or watched a successful teacher in their systems, clearly you're going to have a struggle. You're going to have a growing cycle. It doesn't make you a bad person. It just means, yeah, that would be like plopping me in, in a job that I have no clue about because I wasn't an educator before. I've never watched an effective person do this job, but hey, here you go. And by the way, here's like 27 beings, and they know that you have no clue what you're doing. Have fun with that. My problem was, as a priority principal, I don't have time for ineffective teachers very long, right? Because my kids need to learn. We've got a lot of ground to move. And so that was very stressful because I knew that they needed help and support, meaning the teacher, and I knew my kids needed to know the subject. And that's a very big tension that a lot of our priority principals are struggling through. And usually the persons that win are the kids, which is good, but it's sad because we have people that have attempted a new career and maybe failed very quickly as a result of a very poor placement. And so that is something that I have been talking about as a principal for probably at least 2 years, because a lot of those folks land in our priority settings in our less successful schools, so academically speaking. So I agree, and I will work on that. I've got it in here, and I'll give you an update on what I come up with next month. So,
just one comment.
Yes, ma'am.
I heard it about student teaching, but continuing education about racism, white privilege, because I've been doing this work for 15 years, and every day I'm working on how aware am I of my racism, just because it's a cult, not that I'm choosing, it's just a subconscious that I've been, as a white person, subjected to. So it's not about just student teaching, it's
All the way through their career.
It's all the way through, and it should be.
And that's what that's the only thing I was gonna mention too, because yeah, we'll exchange all these things and whatnot. But also for yourself and for your team, because even here there was a few microaggressions and some things that you said that you could tell that, for one, diversity is meant for white people. Like everybody else is diverse. We're, black and woman, whatever. And so a lot of times we don't understand that, and we think that we must teach this to somebody else, and it's not going to be able to convey, exactly what's happening within these stories that they told, and those are multiple type stories. Making sure that training happens with people who are outside the institutions that you be messing with. So like we talked about student teaching, making sure it's away from the education setting, collegiate setting, and then away from primary school setting. You know what I'm saying? Like those people who are really like maybe community focused, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to fix a lot of those problems. Fixing it ourselves, kind of like the police. You can't fix your own problems. I can't say I was doing a bad job and then, you know what, I changed and I'm good. No. So that would be something to definitely increase and look for. I know that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Well, one thing I can say though is, I guess I can say, I think I can say this. it's not, I mean, this isn't anything you care about, I'm just like, oh God, I've got an assistant superintendent be like, you shouldn't have talked about that yet, because teachers don't. But we're looking at trying to prescribe a certain number of hours that are required internally, meaning for professional development for teachers. So right now, I just get my hours, I can get them kind of really any way I want.
Right.
We would like to control a certain amount of those hours. And I think this is going to be passed for this coming, I don't know that it'll be effective for this coming school year, but the one that's next. But I assure you that we can get a lot of things done and a lot of people through a lot of stuff. And I do think a portion of that could very well be just the type of update training that you're referring to. And we could use community partners like this group to help inform us of who should be doing that, who are the best parties to do that, what are the best programs to do that, and do it in a way that is meaningful and a good use of their time. Because having someone maybe in an area that doesn't really know what they need to be doing, deciding what to do, and then doing it and it not being good is a waste of everyone's time. And we don't want to do that. So I think that this partnership or my ability to come through here and get that kind of feedback and information, or maybe have a couple folks that meet with me outside of this team, we can probably make sure that what we do is focused and done by the right people and the right message is given out. Does that sound reasonably like what you're looking for me to attempt to try to do?
Yeah, for you
Okay.
to do.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Well, I will send you the list of things that I heard that I'm working on.
Okay.
And then if you get more things after I leave, please feel free to send those to me. And then I will also communicate with you about a time for me to come next month.
Yeah.
Okay, I really appreciate the time and the suggestions. A lot of smart people, and I plan to use you to help me. So I appreciate it very much.